Welcome to What's Brewing with IAT Insurance Group, where episode after episode we cover the latest marketplace trends with subject matter experts who are fueling our mission to provide insurance answers together. Grab your cup and let's settle in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the What's Brewing Podcast. My name is Chris Accetta. I'm an AVP of Product Management at the IAT Insurance Group. Today I am joined by my colleague and friend David Geller, who is one of our senior product managers in our product and compliance group. And Dave is probably one of our foremost experts on emerging issues here at IAT. And we are going to be talking about deepfakes and any insurance concerns related to them. So deepfakes, Dave, kind of a very much emerging topic. I'm not sure there's a wide body of knowledge in our industry around this issue. Can you start off by telling us what is a deepfake?
Yeah, well, very topical is artificial intelligence, and we can put deepfake as a category within that. And what it really does is it hits at the three major content types. So it could be audio, video, images, and it can be used to contrive to pull out of thin air, essentially, fake but very realistic aspects of that. And the technology has improved dramatically over the last few years, and it's really opened the doors to scary use cases, to interesting use cases. And I think today we're going to want to talk about, the risks involved with the ever improving deepfake landscape.
So earlier this morning, you and I were having a conversation sort of unrelated to insurance about films. And, everyone's familiar with films and you've got the use of CGI. If you've been to a superhero movie or a sci-fi movie in the last decade, you're aware of what video editing tools and audio editing tools can do for visual medium. Is it safe to assume that deepfakes are kind of analogous to what we see as CGI or special effects in movies, in that they can take something that is real but make it less real or more real depending on what the user wants to do?
Yeah, and you can almost look at it as the democratization of the tools that we're talking about that we'll see in Mad Max or Dune. Now, anyone can log on to the internet and essentially make their own content, whether it's really good audio, even their own music video. So yeah, it's not only just an improvement of the technology, but it just really opens up the availability of people to use it. And I think that's where some of the risks come in, is that anyone can use it.
Yeah, let's talk about those risks, Dave. I mean, it's very interesting. I think we live in interesting times. The technology is probably moving faster than our ability to regulate it. So what, from our insurance perspective, what are some of the happenings, either on a product and regulatory basis or a legal basis, and what are some of the risks we should be thinking about? Let's start with the happenings. Has there been any kind of, with such a new technology, has there been anything on the legal side or on the development side that we ought to be aware of?
Yeah, as you can imagine, this has captured a ton of attention in the media, the news, and people are talking about it. And now we're starting to see some instances of regulators putting pen to paper. There have been plenty of laws drafted the last few years, but we recently saw a first of its kind related to deepfakes that got enacted in New Hampshire a couple months ago. It'll be effective in January. And what differentiates that law is it's going to enable a private right of action. Those are kind of four words that'll catch the attention of any liability professional.
So what does that mean, Dave? Can you expand on that private right of action for a second, just so our listeners are aware what that means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what that means is it provides a very clear roadmap for an individual who, let's say, they get victimized by a deepfake, and that could be, you, Chris, putting a deepfake of me wearing jet skier out and disseminating it to all of IAT. I could be embarrassed. I could be ashamed. Through this law, I could say, hey, Chris, I'm lawyering up. I'm going to sue you. And there might even be a roadmap to bring employers into it too. So that's what really kind of opens up the floodgates, if you will, on the risks that can come out of it.
Right. And for insurers of all types, personal, commercial, what have you, now you're running the risk of additional defense costs, possible settlements and judgments. So, I know, Dave, as a Giants fan, you might have enough to be embarrassed about, not only putting Jets gear on, but, that does bring in some interesting considerations too for employers. Are their employees doing this as part of their job description, or is it something the employees are doing on their own time? Is it really relevant from an insurance perspective when and where deepfakes are created and how they're used?
Yeah, it very well could be. I think that's an area of law that we're tracking and seeing how it evolves. There actually was a recent decision in which an employer was held liable for an individual's personal social media use that was harassing another employee of theirs. And, you can see pretty easily how someone could leverage deepfake technology within their own social media to harass an individual, to, speak poorly maybe about a competitor as well, to defame someone. So again, tying back to the democratization of the use of deepfakes, anyone can use it, and therefore anyone can be victimized by it and possibly bring a lawsuit under New Hampshire law.
Interesting. And do you think that this legislative trend, do you think this will expand beyond New Hampshire to other states?
Yeah, the state of New York has talked about possibly building out a law that will similarly provide for this private right of action. We've seen in the U.S. that it can be kind of a copycat type of nation where, the first state that breaks the ice on maybe a precedent-setting law could set the tone for other states to be like, hey, this makes sense for us. We can do it too. We've seen one state do it already. So yeah, it's something we want to be mindful of. Right now, it's just one state. It's just New Hampshire. I'm not sure if our listeners are overly concerned with that state, but there's reason to think that there could be precedent set out of that.
Well, that's true, Dave. And, as we all know, there's only 50 legislative bodies in the whole country. So if you have one legislative body taking action on something, it's probably only a matter of time until the others sit up and take note. At present, we don't have a lot of state legislatures currently in session, but that's going to change pretty soon. And you're right, we may be dealing with, I don't want to use the term flood, but several new bodies of legislation coming in the next term. So I think as product people, we need to be aware of this. I think we need to be able to be in a position to advise business leaders and our agent partners on how they may want to react to some of this information. From a product development perspective, this is very interesting because I think you've got a bleeding edge technology that's, as you said, very democratized. It could be in the hands of experienced and inexperienced users alike. And, we don't have a kind of a ready-made contractual exclusion for this or a solution for it. We're, as an industry, we're using forms that were created 30 or 40 years ago. And I'm not sure that those forms were written with this kind of exposure in mind. You've got a technology that kind of gets enhanced by the day. The law we write in 2024, 2025 may be obsolete by 2026. Do you think, Dave, in your opinion, there's anything we can pull from our past, either in a product sphere for insurance purposes or from a legislative sphere for regulatory purposes, that we could use as a guide for what might come next?
I would say that if we take a look at the privacy landscape over the last decade or so, we've seen a ton of concern from individuals who feel that their privacy gets breached through the company's handling of data, through their selling of the data, through them being hacked and then the data being leaked. It definitely mirrors with AI, with deepfakes, that privacy element of how people can feel invaded. BIPA was a good example of a law that was designed in mind to respond to some of those risks. And we saw plenty of lawsuits arise in Illinois from that. And while it's not the same scope of risk, it certainly brings to mind the claims that were coming through. There was a high number of them, some of them quite severe. So for us, we have to ask ourselves a question, could deepfake private right of action laws bring along the same level of claims?
For our listeners who may not be aware of what BIPA is, I'll try to unpack it. Dave, you correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm missing out on anything, but that was a biometric Information Privacy Act that Illinois passed where if an employer or an organization collected someone's biometric data, which I believe was defined in the legislation, which could mean fingerprints, retinal scans, voice pattern analysis, if that information was collected without the consent of the individual, an entity could be fined or somehow sanctioned per violation. So it was of great concern to the insurance industry because you had a business scans its employee's badge every morning. They've got hundreds of violations per day and 25 days a month. I mean, that can add up quickly. And I think you also expose yourself to potential class actions, which as an insurer, we never want to hear those two words either. Class actions are usually very, very expensive and time consuming. Did I miss anything there, Dave?
No, I think that was spot on. And the class action risk is certainly one we want to kind of, I guess, speculate as to how this law, if other states pass it, what that might look like. Beyond the individual who actually makes a deep fake that embarrasses or hurts someone else, seeing who else could be named to be responsible as part of a lawsuit, and if there could be multiple claimants, that's, I think, the multi-million-dollar question there. And right now we're at a point of we're raising questions, but we don't have a crystal ball. But at the same time, asking these questions at least enables us to kind of assess the risks involved with this.
Yeah, and BIPA too was one of those issues that quickly kind of rose to the top of everyone's concern list. I think you even had Verisk or Insurance Services Office getting involved with some contractual revisions in response to that particular piece of legislation. And that was one instance where I think there was a more rapid response to something that really, an exposure that was really never contemplated by the insurance products that we use in our business. I think back probably 25, 30 years ago, on the property side, we had huge mold concerns, especially after Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida in 1992. You had a lot of buildings that required remediation for mold. The property forms were never really designed to deal with those kind of losses, and data collected up to that point didn't factor in the costs for mold remediation in the base fire rating. So you saw that one instance lead to sort of changes in how insurance policies were written and sold. Now every property insurance policy contains a minor sublimit for mold remediation coverage that an insured can buy additional coverage for if their carrier allows that. As we kind of pivot now to what deepfakes effects might be on our industry, do you see there being any kind of contractual modifications on the horizon?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's definitely possible when we get a sense of the kind of claims that come in, the kind of risks that are involved. There might be some ways to take some pen to paper there.
Do you think that insurers are generally, or producers and insurers are generally aware of some of the risks involved in deepfakes? I see anything from fraudulent claim submissions to publication of false information on a wide scale. I mean, this issue could affect carriers in multiple ways. If I think back to the old inland marine days, right, when you had false pretense coverage. Many of the listeners are probably familiar with false pretense coverage, but that's where you might have a load of copper wire at a freight terminal that's supposed to be picked up by carrier A. Yet an individual shows up in a delivery uniform. He's got a clipboard. He's got a truck, and he says, "Here, I'm here to pick up this copper wire for carrier B." And the terminal workers say, "Sure, can I see your manifest?" And they might produce some faked documents, or they might have a number to call. "Oh, I don't see it." "Well, you can call Charlie at the home office, but Charlie is just a guy that this perpetrator has roped into the scam." So they would walk away with stolen merchandise without ever really committing any kind of a crime, so to speak. You'd have someone voluntarily giving up their property because they were tricked into doing so. Do you see any analogs between that false pretense coverage that we do as an industry offer coverage for and the possible application of deepfake technology and misinformation on the liability side?
100%. And I think what you're hitting on with that example is the ingenuity of people who are kind of armed with good ideas and good technology to get their way. It's a tale that goes back as long as time. And I think all we're doing now is just introducing more novel ways to do so. So it's important, if you're an insurance company, if you're a business in general, to prepare that, hey, that we're in a brave new world of applications for tech, and it's important to be prepared. And sometimes things might not go your way, and then it's also important to get the lessons from that and beef up your risk management practices so that won't happen again.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, Dave. Aside from being aware that deepfakes exist, how do company underwriters and agents arm themselves or improve their awareness of this exposure?
Yeah, starting with the underwriting process, this spans beyond just deepfake to AI itself, but would be very helpful to know if insureds are using any AI vendors, what their contracts might be looking like with them, how the hold harmlesses and indemnifications are going, because a lot of these are brand new companies. They might have the terms of service in their fine print that might not be so favorable to the customers that are using their product. So if the price of a vendor looks too good to be true, there's a chance that it might be, and you might be holding the bag if something happens.
Right. The old adage, you get what you pay for.
Exactly.
So, is there anything that in your mind, Dave, and again, I think that's fair to say because this is also new, this conversation might be considered highly speculative in some ways, but is there anything from an underwriting perspective that you might see as a red flag when it comes to deepfakes, aside from contractual terms, of course?
Yeah, first and foremost, since like we've been discussing, it's such a novel and evolving thing. I think if I were an underwriter, I would be happy to see that at least an insured or a prospective insured is thinking about it, and they're baking the encountering of deepfakes into their risk management practices. Because if they have that mindset embedded that they're ready to tackle this issue, they'll be more nimble to respond. They're clearly thinking ahead to something that is still quite new.
That's a good observation, Dave. I think any organization that might have a clearly articulated or documented AI policy would probably be a better risk than one that didn't have that. Dave, do you think there's any, or can you think of any classes of business or types of policyholders or prospective policyholders that might find themselves more at risk for some sort of deep fake concern?
The first line that comes to mind for me are homeowners programs. The cyberbullying issue has been talked about with that line pretty much since the internet was rolling out. And now we're just seeing an evolution of, unfortunately, a new tool that could be used to embarrass people and to be used, with malice. If a claim is brought, if something bad happens to the individual that was victimized, how would a homeowner's policy respond to that? So that's, one of the questions that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think that's been a thorny issue for quite some time. I can't speak to exactly how the homeowners insurance market may have dealt with that. Certain carriers may have taken a different approach than others, but it certainly remains a concern. I don't think anyone's found an airtight solution to the problem yet.
Mm-hmm. And then downstream of that cyberbullying example, what's the responsibility of the school? Let's say this deepfake was made on site during school hours. Could they be brought into a lawsuit that the same personal lines claim was brought against?
That's a very good point, Dave. You have certain commercial exposures too. I think about carriers that are insuring municipalities or educational institutions or even cultural institutions like museums, aquariums, anything that's involved in public interaction, any kind of custodial exposure. I think that you might want to pay extra close attention to such organizations' AI policies. See if they've had a history of any kind of PI and AI or personal advertising injury claims over the years. Some of this might just be, even though the risks may be bleeding edge and not well understood in some circles, I think a lot of this maybe spins back to underwriting 101. What do you know about your risk? What are they telling you? And we always advise our underwriters, you can read an application, but check the web. People will tell things to Facebook that they'll never put on an insurance application. So maybe it is just good old exposure analysis, blocking and tackling and underwriting 101. So Dave, I think we've talked about kind of what a deepfake is, what some of the risks and issues are in our industry, and then a little bit about underwriting and mitigation of these exposures. So let's look ahead. What's on our radar? What should we be looking for next? Is this still an evolving exposure? What do you see in your crystal ball that might be coming down the road?
I think I'm very mindful of how the pioneers and the leaders in the AI space themselves are going to try and tackle the deepfake issue, whether that's through proactive risk management. We can call that having a requirement to watermark any material that's completely fake. And it's easily discerns like this is not real. There's a disclaimer, or if there's regulation that then requires that. Either way, if we get that, then that could mitigate any damage that might come from building a deepfake. If there's a malicious picture generated of someone, but it says in clear text at the bottom, this is not real, then that's a way to reduce the claims risk, the claim severity, even if it's, defaming to someone else. So I'm really curious to see how the leaders in the AI industry tackle this.
Interesting. I know we've seen some social media platforms already start marking content as demonstrably false. There is a bright warning for viewers of that content, letting them know it's not true. I wonder what kind of effect that may have on certain individuals. The real unfortunate thing is, despite warnings and despite material that obviously distorts or even contradicts reality, real harm can come from some of this stuff. You've got people taking matters into their own hands, people misinterpreting things. The insurance industry is going to be paying real dollars for false misinformation. As far as platforms taking steps, do you think there's anything the insurance industry could do broadly as a group, and not necessarily carrier by carrier, to promote awareness of not only deepfakes, but things like generative AI, things that could potentially be catastrophe level exposures on a third party basis?
Yeah, I think it all starts with communication, and that could mean internal, where, for us, I know product and underwriting, we're tightly discussing a lot of different things, and AI certainly being one of them. But that also goes external. Underwriters working with agents, working with brokers, saying, hey, is there any generative AI being used with your programs? Has there, do you see loss runs? If there's a claim involving AI, what happened there? What's the background? So just keeping those lines of communication opening, I think is a great step to kind of get out in front. The winds of change are swirling rapidly with it. So staying ahead, it's pretty crucial.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, Dave. And I'll go kind of expand on that a little bit too. I think, and you have in most organizations a relationship between your product and compliance department and your underwriting department. We can all be getting smarter, right? As this technology continues to evolve, our learning should evolve. We should be learning more about this every day. We on the product and regulatory side, and then be in a position to advise our business partners, be they our internal underwriters or our agent partners, about how they can make better decisions around this exposure. For our purposes, Dave, you're keeping track of emerging issues sort of on your own and through communications from various industry platforms. I think of APCIA, for example. We also correspond frequently with Verisk or ISO about this emerging issue. They are running a panel on that. So I think there is a willingness for product managers and underwriters to continue learning about this. But like you said, the learning doesn't mean anything unless we're communicating that knowledge. I think the smarter we get, the better underwriters will become.
Yeah, when it comes to this world where we're tracking emerging technologies, emerging risks, it certainly takes a village. And someone might be talking to another individual who's sharing their wisdom with them. Someone else is reading deep online studies, publications, pooling all that knowledge together and then making good decisions. That's the roadmap to a good risk management program.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, just being aware of state legislation that's getting passed, keeping our ear to the ground. I know it's not sexy, it's not glamorous, but reading those legislative session minutes can be very helpful. Like we mentioned up front, there is no contractual known contractual solution to this at present. Is there an opportunity for a carrier to be a pioneer, like you said, or be a leader in this? Of course. I just don't know that our industry is going to be that forward thinking. I don't know who's going to be the first carrier that puts a toe in the water and says, this is how we're going to define a deep fake and this is how our policy is going to respond. I think there's going to be, like you said, Dave, it's going to take a village. It's going to take carriers with product and underwriting expertise to communicate with the industry groups to come up with some sort of broad contractual solution. I think, in some ways this might be analogous to how the industry has responded to the legalization of cannabis. Right, you have various actions at the state level, which are fine and good, but until something happens at the federal level, it's very hard for our industry to respond. I know we're regulated by the states, but this is kind of an irony that we're waiting on the federal government in some ways to help us decide what we need to do here. Do you think there's a role for the federal government to play in deepfake mitigation?
Ideally, yes. We've seen, we talked a little bit about the privacy landscape, and certainly the piecemealing of different state laws, it can create some confusion, different standards of compliance. If the federal government were to say, we're going to tackle deepfake with a one-size-fits-all, there is an opportunity to, make it clear what needs to be done to manage a risk properly, assuming that the law actually contemplates the risk appropriately. Even as a broader technological issue, some laws are very difficult to craft with certain technologies in mind because it's tough to tell what the unintended consequences of regulation can be.
Yeah, I agree, Dave. I think this is, it's in many ways, this still feels like kind of the Wild West, right? It's very early in the game for when it comes to deepfake underwriting and deepfake risk analysis. We've sort of started off by talking about what the technology is and how it's become democratized and how you could have any number of users, both on a personal or corporate level. We talked a little bit about what are the things the insurance industry needs to know about these risks. Are there, certain classes of business that may find themselves particularly vulnerable to this exposure? Are there certain risk types? Is there any kind of data we can pull from our own records that give us some insight as to how we should be treating this? And then when it comes to underwriting solutions, I think, we've kind of restated the obvious in some ways. Yes, we've got a very new, very emerging type of technology that could do potentially catastrophic harm. But the best tools we have today are still, I think, our risk selection and awareness. And that gets back to the point you made kind of towards the end, Dave, was learning and communication. Right, becoming aware of the exposures. What does a deep fake mean? How are they used? Are there emerging technologies or laws that are coming into the fore? And then letting our business partners know about that. And I think, it all gets back to sort of the simple approach, right? Learn, communicate, and underwrite. On that, Dave, I'm not sure I have anything else to add on the subject. Dave, do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, just appreciate the chance to kind of talk about this really interesting issue. It feels good to know that even if everything we end up saying here is wrong, we can just claim it was a deepfake, wipe our hands clean of it, and move on. So this is a win-win.
I agree, Dave. Yeah, I wouldn't want to have to do that, but it kind of gets back to the point. What is real anymore? It's an interesting thing to consider. It could be potentially problematic for our industry, so I do think we have to stay on top of it. But yeah, who knows, Dave? 6 weeks from now, everything we've talked about could be obsolete. I hope it isn't, but I have to hold out. I have to be aware that it could be. So again, Dave, I want to thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your expertise. For our listeners, if you have any questions, I would say go to your product people or your company underwriters if you're on the agency side and ask questions. Educate yourselves about what these risks are and how you should mitigate them. Speaking personally and kind of on your behalf, Dave, I don't think you've heard the last of us on this. I think this is probably going to be something that keeps coming up. But I want to thank again everyone for listening. And this is Chris Accetta and Dave Geller signing off from the What's Brewing podcast.
Providing insurance answers together is what we do best. Thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of What's Brewing. Until next time.